In this video, I'm going to answer a common question, which is about invisible nerfing. That is, when the intelligence of a model seems to be reduced. There are a few scenarios here. The first is that some users feel that after using it for a while, the model seems to get dumber. The second possibility is that some people use the same model, like GPT-5, through platforms like Perplexity or other tools, for example, using it within Monica, but they feel that the output is worse than the original ChatGPT. At the same time, I'll also address a recent question that many people have. Is GPT-5 actually getting dumber? For previous versions like GPT-4o, to understand this issue, you first need to know that at the GPT-5 API level, there are actually a lot of settings. For example, there are different model sizes, which I'll talk more about in a bit, and each model also has its own specific configurations. For instance, you can set how long it thinks about a problem and how much text it outputs. Thirdly, the model can also use tools. So, if you're using a tool like Poe, for example, if services like Poe or even Monica don't provide tool access, or if they set these configurations to the minimum, then there might be some discrepancies. I've made this simple diagram to help everyone understand the GPT-5 model, which is divided into large, medium, and small versions. The largest one is called GPT-5, the next size down is called GPT-5 Mini, and the smallest one is called GPT-5 Nano. The larger the model, theoretically, the smarter it is and the longer its output can be. Now, since we've already entered We've now entered the era of reasoning models. With GPT-5, it can decide for itself when to spend more time thinking. If you're using ChatGPT Plus, meaning the paid version, the default depth of reasoning is set to medium. If you haven't been following my videos, just hearing this might be a bit confusing. And that's understandable. First, each model comes in different sizes, and then each model can also be set to different levels of reasoning depth. The most time-consuming level is high, followed by medium, and then low. The smallest one is That's it. So, in theory, if you use GPT-5 and set it to high for reasoning, its output will take the longest, but theoretically the answers should be the best. Now, if you're a free user of GPT, you do get to try out the reasoning model a few times, but most likely you're using the lowest version, which is GPT-5 Nano, and the reasoning depth is set to the minimum, called minimal. Don't forget, there are now 700 million active users on ChatGPT, so they can't allocate too many resources to free users. Alright, moving on. Here's the main point. You might ask, how big is the performance gap between these invisible model sizes and the different reasoning times? The answer is, it's actually quite significant. Now, when different AI companies release their models, they all do their own internal testing. But people tend to think these tests are biased. So what did I do? I looked for some third-party tests out there, because their results are more objective. On this ranking chart, the higher the score, the better. Here, GPT-5 actually has 4 different rankings. The highest score, 69 points, goes to GPT-5 High, which is the one I mentioned earlier that takes the longest reasoning time. The second place, with 68 points, is also GPT-5, but with medium reasoning time. If you go down to GPT-5 Low, its score isn't bad either, still 63 points. But if you use GPT-5 with the minimal reasoning time, the score suddenly drops from 63 all the way down to just 44 points. This ranking is even lower than DeepSeek R1 and Gemini Flash 2.5. Now, in order to let's take a closer look at another interesting unofficial ranking. In this particular ranking, the higher up you are positioned, the higher your overall intelligence score is considered to be. Similarly, the impressive GPT-5 model takes the top 3 spots all at once, in a very specific order: high, medium, and low. All 3 of their remarkable scores are significantly above 75 points. As for GPT-5 Minimal, it unfortunately ranks somewhere after the 20th place, with a comparatively low score of only 56.46 points. So coming back to this detailed chart, we can clearly observe. You'll notice that, on the surface, these 3 models are all called GPT-5, but the amount of time they spend thinking really affects the answers they output. Especially with the minimal version, if you use that one, its performance is actually even lower than the previous GPT 4.1 version. So, when you're using GPT-5 on Poe, Publicity, or other tools, you need to be clear about which model you're using and how much thinking time it's set to, of course. If you're just using it to correct grammar, then it really doesn't matter which model you use. But if you want it to help you solve more complex problems, do calculations, or even search for information online, then I suggest you don't use the minimal model. Looking back, these 3 key points will affect the model's intelligence. So, I've already answered the first one, which is the difference in model size. The second is the model settings. Now you know the difference in reasoning effort. That is the amount of time it spends thinking. Besides that, there are other settings as well. When it comes to E or capacity, you cannot control it. For example, on Poe, you can choose to control whether the model outputs more or less text, but you cannot control that here. Also, it depends on whether Poe's tools provide features like browsing the web or running code. Simply put, it is about the ability to use tools. Now, just saying it like this is pretty hard to understand. I would rate it a 10 out of 10 in difficulty. So here, I will do a demonstration. In ChatGPT, for example, it actually has built-in code execution. What does that mean? Well, running code makes it easier for you to do calculations, for instance. Yes, even though we know how to do mental math, when it comes to slightly more complicated calculations, we should use a calculator, right? It's the same with language models. Their strength is in language. So for calculations, you should ask it to use a calculator. So what does that mean? Here, let me show you. I'll switch back to the older model, GPT-4, and here, I'll input a math problem. 4.2 times 325.555. Now, when you see it just displaying the equation in text, you already shouldn't trust its answer. The correct answer to this arithmetic problem is 1,374. 4.495321. See here? It got the answer wrong. What I want to say is that most language models can't handle these kinds of calculations. As long as there are a lot of digits after the decimal point, they usually get it wrong. That's because the essence of a language model is to find patterns in its mind. If it hasn't seen this particular calculation before, it just can't give you the right answer. But what you can do is force it to use a calculator. Actually, in the GPT-4o version, it already has calculator functionality. So now I'll modify this question and force it to use the calculator. Talking about used to, meaning using tools, see here? You can see it's running a program. This code is called Piven. By running this code, it gets the correct answer, which is 137 4.495321. That's correct. Next, I'm going to test using GPT-5. Since it's an arithmetic problem, I'll use thinking. In ChatGPT, you can turn on thinking to see its thought process. You'll notice that during its thinking process, it actually uses a calculator itself. Here, you can see in the prompt, there, I didn't specifically tell it to use a tool, but it decided on its own to use one and came up with the correct answer. Now, I'll try clicking refresh and use the same model again. Likewise, I turn on its thought process. In the thought process this time, it says, although this calculation isn't very complicated, I still need to be careful. It says it can always use Python to do some analysis or calculations. So, for 2 consecutive times, even though I didn't tell it to use a tool, it made that decision on its own. This task requires the use of tools, and this is the biggest difference between GPT-5 and the previous GPT-4o. In the training process, GPT-5 is much better at using tools to solve problems. So, for the same question, now I'm going to put it into Poe to test its ability to use tools. The premise, of course, is that the Poe platform has to provide the tool for it to use. So right now, I'm using GPT-5, using the same prompt, and then I'll interact with it. Speaking of using tools, it's really impressive. Out of 10, it's a 10. Even without using tools, it managed to get the answer right. Now let me try again. The second calculation though was wrong. So as you can see, sometimes even without using tools, it can get the answer right, but it's really unreliable. In Poe, actually you can change the thinking time. There's a tutorial above that says you can add this sentence at the end of your prompt to change its thinking time. I just realized that below, there's actually this option. So here I chose medium. Actually, for the Plus version of GT, a lot of them are set to medium. In Poe, I noticed that when I asked it to use Tor, it didn't really seem to understand what I was saying. So I just directly changed it to ask it to use Python instead, and then checked to see if the results would improve. After I adjusted this reasoning effort, you can clearly see that the response time became much slower. Now, it's already been 16 seconds. Now it's starting to respond. Here. You can see that it successfully used Python to compute the answer. So here, I tried it again, and once again, the reasoning effort was set to medium. So under the conditions of using GPT-5 and reasoning effort set to medium, it successfully output the answer twice in a row. But the key is, you have to clearly specify that you want to force it to use code to do the calculation. So to sum up, 1. On this slide, you can now better understand why sometimes when you use Poe or other tools with the same model, it seems to perform a bit worse. The first reason is that actually within GPT-5, there are many different model sizes. The nano and mini versions are smaller models, and their performance is lower. The second and more important reason is the reasoning effort. If it's set to minimal by default, its performance is especially poor. From my initial tests, if you don't specifically adjust the reasoning effort in Poe, it's set to use minimal by default. So for those of you using Poe, you need to pay attention to this. In my earlier tests actually, Poe has Python code built in, but sometimes when it uses this tool, certain issues can occur. So you'll need to judge for yourself whether the answer is correct or not. Lastly, let's test the tool for searching information online. Right now, I'll do a test with this in ChatGPT. Searching online in Poe, how do you use GPT-5 reason effort? Now, if you're a paid user of Church, you might want to try turning on thinking when you ask it to search for information. I've noticed that now it tends to know how to cite official documents. For example, right now you can see that it has gone into POE.com to look for this information to answer the question. Here, it has successfully found the correct answer. Then, I did the same thing. We tried entering the same prompt in Poe. Again, I'm not testing the model's performance, I'm testing whether Poe has integrated the ability to search for information online in the GPT-5 model. It's just a tool. So now, let's go into Poe and use GPT-5 Nano to enter the same prompt, asking it to search for information online. In this test, it didn't search for information online, because if Poe had searched online, it would provide citations, that is, it would show where it found the information, so it couldn't come up with an answer. So here, I tried again. I clicked retry. I tried it 2 times in a row, asking it to search for information online, but it still didn't do it. So, I suspect that this model doesn't have the tool to connect to the internet for searching information. Then I tested other models, like Gemini 2.5 Fresh. I noticed that on Poe, some models have the word search added at the end, so that's my own guess. It needs to be a model with search added at the end of its name for it to be able to search for information online. So, for now, with GPT-5, this version, at this moment, it seems like it still can't search the internet for fact-checking. So if you're using these models on Poe, you need to be careful. Actually, there are other reasons that can cause the model's performance to drop, such as the context window limitation. But as for that part, I'll save it for the next video. If you want to learn comprehensively, if you want to apply AI and GPT in your work, you're welcome to join our upcoming course on September 20th, which is a Saturday, held in Lai Chi Kok. In this workshop, we'll talk about the underlying principles. The analogy is that AI is like your part-time assistant. You need to know what this assistant is capable of and what its limitations are. For example, you just learned that, oh, it's actually not that good at calculations, but it can use a calculator. If you never knew this, you might have the misconception that AI is useless, that AI just can't do it. If you lack this foundational knowledge, it will lead to and accumulate a lot of misunderstandings. Now, why is this course called a workshop? It's because everyone needs to bring an iPad or a laptop to do hands-on exercises on the spot. We've prepared a lot of fun tasks for everyone to try, to practice prompting, to design a box, and so on. After taking this course, not only will you be able to apply AI in your daily work, but you'll also have the ability to communicate with an IT company to help the company develop some AI applications. If you want to learn more about the course content, feel free to click the link below the video. See you in the course.